Sometimes the strangest mysteries do not start with a missing person or a strange photograph. Sometimes they begin with a car, a perfectly normal vehicle suddenly found in a place it should not be. No driver, no tracks, no reason for it to be there, and behind every abandoned car is a real story. Sometimes tragic, sometimes unbelievable, and sometimes so confusing that investigators are still trying to figure it out. Today we're looking at real abandoned cars found in places they absolutely should not have been. In 2018, a group of hikers in Moab, Utah spotted something shining halfway up a steep desert cliff. When they climbed closer, they realized it was a Subaru Outback stuck impossibly in the middle of a sandstone wall. There were no tire tracks leading up to it, no broken branches, no skid marks, nothing that explained how a car could physically climb a vertical rock face. When rescuers finally reached the vehicle, they discovered something even more confusing. The driver was not inside. The keys were still in the ignition, the car was locked, and there were no footprints anywhere around it. Investigators eventually learned the owner had been reported missing days earlier, but the landscape around the cliff was so barren that there was no explanation for how he could have exited the vehicle without leaving any sign behind. The only thing rescuers could confirm was that the car had not rolled down from above. The cliff was too sheer, and there were no impact marks on the rock. The car was buried in snow, but the driver was gone. In 2006, a family on a remote Oregon forest road came across a strange sight. A silver station wagon stuck in several feet of snow. The doors were locked. There were footprints leading away from the vehicle, but the prints suddenly stopped in the middle of the woods. The car belonged to James Kim, a tech journalist who had taken a wrong turn while trying to get his family back to the highway. His wife and children were rescued alive after staying in the car for days, but James had left the vehicle to find help. His footprints in the snow were the only clue searchers had. What made the discovery so mysterious was how his tracks simply vanished. Searchers believed the snowstorm had buried the remaining prints, but because the area was incredibly remote and nearly impossible to reach in winter, the location of the abandoned car baffled investigators. In 2014, a group of hunters near the Tennessee River reported something odd. A Jeep Cherokee sitting in the middle of a dense forest clearing more than 2 miles away from the nearest drivable road. The Jeep was in perfect condition, no damage, no signs it had been dragged or lifted, but the thick forest around it was untouched. No broken branches, no tire marks, and absolutely no path wide enough for the vehicle to pass through. When authorities ran the plates, they found the Jeep had been reported stolen 8 years earlier, but that only made the mystery deeper. Did someone abandon it there on purpose? How did they even get it into the clearing without cutting a trail? Even with heavy machinery, it would have caused noticeable damage, but there was nothing. Forestry workers eventually said the only logical explanation was that the vehicle had been placed there long before the underbrush grew thick around it. But even that didn't explain how it arrived in the first place. In 2015, police in Barron County, Wisconsin made a shocking discovery. A black Toyota Camry submerged under thick winter ice in the middle of a lake. At first, they thought it had fallen through recently, but divers found something surprising. The ice around the car was thick and undamaged. The car had clearly gone under long before the freeze. Even stranger, there were no signs of vehicle entry from the surrounding shoreline. No broken ice trail, no cracks leading from the edge of the lake toward the vehicle. It was sitting too far out to have simply been driven onto the ice surface and then fallen through. When investigators pulled the car out, they learned it was involved in a cold case from the early 1990s. The owner had vanished, and the disappearance was never solved. To this day, the exact path the car took to end up under the lake ice remains unknown. A fully intact pickup truck found underground with no tunnel big enough to bring it in. In 2011, a team of mine explorers ventured into an abandoned copper mine near Superior, Arizona. Deep inside one of the sealed chambers, they found an old pickup truck sitting on its wheels in almost perfect condition. The chamber had only one entrance, and the opening was far too small to fit a vehicle. There were no signs the truck had been lowered by equipment, no ropes, no cuts in the rock, no collapsed ceiling. It was as if the truck had always been there. When the VIN was traced, investigators discovered it had been stolen in the late 1970s. But at that time, the mine entrance had already been sealed by the state, meaning no one should have been able to get the vehicle inside. The discovery became so famous that the Arizona Mine Inspector's Office used the case as an example of how old mines can still hold dangerous and impossible surprises. In 1996, a beige Plymouth Voyager was found abandoned near Anvil Canyon in Death Valley. Temperatures had reached deadly levels. Rangers expected to find footprints around the vehicle, but there was nothing. Not even one. The minivan belonged to 4 German tourists who had entered the park with no special equipment. Their disappearance became one of the most difficult searches ever conducted in Death Valley history. The vehicle was found miles from any marked road, in a location only experienced off-road drivers could reach. Yet the tourists had no off-road training. Investigators could not explain how they navigated there. Even more confusing, the tires left no track marks that could be followed beyond a very short stretch. Years later, skeletal remains were discovered miles away, but the path the group took and the reason they abandoned the car in such an impossible location remains unexplained. After Cyclone Chiral hit Germany in 2007, emergency crews began clearing roads. That is when they came across the surreal sight of a Volkswagen Golf perched high in the branches of a pine tree. The trunk was not broken, the branches were bent, but not enough to explain how a heavy car landed several meters above ground. Locals insisted no one saw the car lifted by wind, and meteorologists said the storm was not strong enough to carry a vehicle of that size. When crews lowered the car, they confirmed it had no major external damage. It had not flipped or rolled, it had simply been deposited into the tree. Investigators concluded that the car must have been pushed by floodwaters before being lodged in the branches, but the area it was found in showed no major flooding. The event became one of the most photographed storm aftermath scenes in Germany. In 2019, a man in North Carolina purchased a storage unit at auction. When he cut the lock and opened it, he expected furniture, and instead he found a 1970s Pontiac Firebird wedged inside the space so tightly that investigators first believed it had been dismantled and reassembled. But the car had not been taken apart. It was intact, and the doorway was physically too small for the vehicle to pass through. Even removing the door frame would not have made enough room. The previous owner had died, and no one knew when the car was placed inside. The storage facility itself was more than 40 years old, meaning the building had never been modified. The man who bought the unit ended up selling the Firebird to a collector who considered the strange discovery part of the vehicle's history. In 2021, hikers in the San Juan Mountains spotted a Toyota 4Runner blocking a narrow trail more than 11,000 feet up. The trail had steep drops on both sides and was not accessible to vehicles at any point. Rangers said even a dirt bike would struggle to reach the area. The SUV showed no obvious damage that would suggest it had been pushed or rolled. It was simply sitting on the trail with its doors locked. When authorities located the owner, they learned he had gone missing earlier that week, but he was later found alive in a nearby town and claimed he did not remember leaving the vehicle there. He insisted he had taken a wrong turn and abandoned the car when he panicked, but rangers found no route that allowed access. Because the terrain was too dangerous to attempt a recovery, helicopter crews had to airlift the SUV out. Rangers later said it was one of the strangest abandoned vehicle recoveries that they had ever handled. In 2013, a team documenting abandoned structures around Angkor discovered an old Honda Civic sitting inside a collapsed stone corridor. The temple ruins were centuries old, the car was from the 1990s, and somehow it was inside an area that had no open entrance wide enough for it to pass through. The jungle around the structure made it impossible to drive a car near it. Even if someone tried, the vegetation would show obvious signs of disturbance. But nothing was disturbed. The car was sitting almost untouched, partially covered in vines as if it had been sealed there for years. Authorities later learned the vehicle was linked to illegal logging operations. Smugglers had apparently pushed the car into the ruin decades earlier, long before the jungle regrew around it. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you again soon. Goodbye.